Welcome to The Explainer. So, technology is blurring the lines between what's real and what's fantasy, right? Well, right in the middle of that whole storm is one specific object, the hyper-realistic sex doll. Today, we're going to break down the really intense debate over whether these synthetic companions are just harmless fun or if they're a symbol that could actually threaten the idea of consent itself.
Okay, let's just dive right in with the quote that really cuts to the heart of the matter. This argument from Eskens is basically the foundation for one whole side of this debate. Think about it. If an object has no feelings, no consciousness, can it actually be a victim? And if the answer is no, well, is this entire conversation about consent totally missing the point?
To really get what's going on here, you've got to understand that we are not talking about the simple, inflatable toys from decades ago. Oh no, the technology has changed a lot. And that's transformed not just the dolls, but our whole relationship with them.
Yeah, these aren't just plastic figures anymore. Now with AI, they can hold conversations, they can simulate emotions. They've literally moved from being a sex toy to what some owners actually call a post-human synthetic partner. And that change, right there, is exactly where this whole controversy just explodes.
So, let's start with the loudest criticism. The argument isn't really about hurting the doll itself. I mean, it's an object. The fear is that what people do in their fantasy world could have very, very real consequences in ours.
Now, this slide gives us the fancy academic term for that fear, symbolic consequences. It's a bit of a mouthful, but the idea is pretty simple. It's the worry that if you practice something with a doll that literally cannot say no, it might actually change the way you think about consent with a real person who absolutely can.
And these points, these are the absolute pillars for groups like the Campaign Against Sex Robots. To them, these dolls are the embodiment of woman-hating. They see them as training devices that just hammer home the idea that women are supposed to be passive, quiet objects for male pleasure.
And, get this, shows you just how serious this side takes the threat. This is a quote from an actual proposed law. They're drawing a straight line, a causal link, from interacting with a doll to committing violence in the real world. The stakes, from their perspective, could not be higher.
All right, so now let's flip the script. Let's look at the powerful counter-argument. And this one challenges that whole idea of symbolic harm by going back to basics and focusing on what the doll actually is.
This slide puts the two philosophies right up against each other, head to head. On one side, you have the fear that fantasy behavior will bleed into reality. On the other, the rebuttal says that's just a logical mistake. You can't practice non-consent with something that was never capable of consent in the first place.
So the key takeaway here is pretty straightforward. From this point of view, you aren't harming a victim, you're just using an object. And as one source puts it, it should be way less problematic to treat an object like an object than it is to treat a human being like one.
This quote from the philosopher Slavoj Žižek is so important. It really gets inside the user's head. What he's saying is, the users aren't confused. They don't actually think this piece of silicone is a real person. They know exactly what it is, and they are consciously choosing to engage in a fantasy.
You know what this is? It's that willing suspension of disbelief. It's the same thing you do when you watch a movie or play a video game. You know it's not real, but you get into it anyway. This argument directly challenges that idea that users are being trained or fooled. They're always aware of where that line is between the synthetic and the human.
But hold on, because the debate doesn't stop there. It actually takes a turn and gets, well, a lot more personal. What if the issue isn't about harm to the doll or even harm to other people, but about harm to yourself?
And this is the question that really pivots the entire conversation. It moves us away from law and crime and into the realm of philosophy. It basically says, okay, even if we all agree an object can't be a victim, that doesn't necessarily mean we're done asking ethical questions.
This approach is what's known as virtue ethics. It's less interested in did you break a rule and way more interested in what does this action say about the kind of person you are.
This just reframes the entire problem, doesn't it? The question stops being about the doll and starts being about you. Does engaging in these kinds of fantasies, even with an object, help you grow virtues like respect and empathy? Or does it grow something else entirely?
So these questions totally bypass the whole consent issue. It's no longer about what you're doing to the doll, it's about what you're doing to yourself. By acting out these fantasies, are you maybe chipping away at your own character?
Okay, and now we've arrived at what is honestly probably the single most important slide in this entire explainer. Because it points to a huge, gaping hole right in the middle of this whole firestorm.
And here's the bottom line, folks. All of it.
The furious arguments, the proposed laws, the deep philosophical debates, it's all happening in what you'd call an evidence vacuum. We are arguing about this based almost entirely on speculation, on gut feelings, and on fear.
I want you to just look at that number for a second. Let it sink in. That's how many scientific, empirical studies have ever proven a direct, causal link between owning a sex doll and being more likely to commit sexual assault. 0.
And this is basically the scientific community stepping in and yelling, "Hey, everybody, time out." They're making an urgent plea. Before we start making laws about this stuff, we need to move past our moral positions and actually study the real-world effects. We need data, not just debate.
And that's really the question we're all left with, isn't it? Because as this technology just keeps getting better and better, creating even more sophisticated companions, this whole debate is only going to get louder. And without any real evidence, figuring out where to draw that line, well, that's going to be one of the biggest ethical challenges of our time.